What up YouTube, Patrick here, and recently I watched a very interesting video by Andreas Antonopoulos on why Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. Now I've been following Andreas for many years now. He puts out great content both in video and in book form, and I actually agree with most of what he says most of the time. I think he really gets people to think about the fundamental question of why cryptocurrencies were invented, specifically Bitcoin of course, and what their purpose is. But in this video, he made 5 key arguments, I think, on why Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin, but I felt like he left this a little incomplete or maybe misleading. And you see the 5 arguments here. I'm going to go through each of them in detail here in a minute, but I kind of want to counter with my focus on Nano. And the reason for this is because this is the perspective I'm coming in from, and it actually aligns very closely to what he's saying about Bitcoin. And that's one of the reasons that got me thinking about, okay, maybe he's not considering all the options here. Maybe he's not seeing the whole picture. And for some background, for those of you who don't know anything about Nano, its only focus is to be the most efficient, decentralized peer-to-peer digital cash possible. Basically the same thing that was written about by Satoshi Nakamoto in the white paper. What features does it actually have? 0 transaction fees, none. You send 1.1, you get 1.1. Near instant transaction times, less than 1 second for full confirmation. That's not zero conf. That's the fastest cryptocurrency that exists as far as I know. It scales with hardware on the first layer, so you don't need second layers like Lightning Network, at least not for a long time. And I can dive into this. And then also, of course, decentralization. That's the key piece. It's as decentralized or more decentralized than Bitcoin, and it will continue in that direction. And I'm going to dive into that as well later on in this presentation. So Andreas' first argument is that Bitcoin was created at the right time. And in a lot of ways, I agree with this argument. So he says that since Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, it grew up in an environment where people didn't think that this was possible. Money had been something that the government created, controlled, provided to the people, right? How in the world is internet money going to work? You're taking away middlemen, you're trusting algorithms and code instead of people and governments. How is that possible that it will work? Well, people didn't believe it, so Bitcoin just kept going, flying along under the radar, and that gave Bitcoin time to grow strong. It could build solid code, it could get the design right, it could become more decentralized, you could build mining hardware, you could build a whole ecosystem, exchanges, infrastructure, merchants, adoption, all of that, until it's now at the point where it's basically unstoppable. That's his argument. And I agree with that in a lot of ways. But Bitcoin is not the only currency to fly under the radar. Currencies like Nano are seeing almost the exact same thing. One, you probably thought this yourself when I presented the little snippet of Nano on the last slide. You're like, no way, this is too good to be true. It's not possible. It's not possible. So that's another example of Nano just flying along under the radar. It's doing what it says it can do. It's constantly bringing out updates every quarter, every month. New exchanges are adopting it. New services are adopting it because it does what it says it can do. But when you look at market capitalization, it's like in the 40s or 50s sometimes. People don't know. They don't care. It's down there. It's like, whatever. My community, the Nano community, obviously we care, but big picture, we're very small compared to the rest of the cryptocurrency community, and even smaller when you compare ourselves to the world or finance even. And then I'm a pretty big proponent of Nano on Reddit, on Twitter, on YouTube. And you can just look through my comment history, through my discussions with people, and look at the response from other people in the cryptocurrency community. They're doing the exact same thing they did to Bitcoin. They're like, no, it's not possible for this reason, this reason, this reason, even though Nano has good answers to all of those. But they're going through the list and they're like, okay, whatever. They just dismiss it. And Nano is still chugging along. It's building. It's gaining adoption. It's doing real work on the technical fundamental side, which Andreas is actually a huge proponent of. And what I mean is a proponent of technical fundamentals driving interest and growth in a cryptocurrency. So Andreas' second argument is that everyone is looking for the next Bitcoin. And when everyone is looking for the next Bitcoin, pump and dumps happen. People are trying to just get rich, they're trying to make money, and they're selling you the idea of Bitcoin so they can get rich. They just want to say, hey, here's the next Bitcoin. We're going to release this. They're going to take your money. As soon as the coin releases, they're going to sell all their tokens they have, make the money, and cash out. And that's what's happened over and over and over again. And so I agree with this in a way. Andreas also emphasizes that fundamentals, utility, usefulness is what matters. Bitcoin became a store of value over time, not because it was from the beginning said Bitcoin is a store of value. It makes you money, so invest in Bitcoin because it makes you money. No. People went to Bitcoin because it was peer-to-peer, decentralized, digital cash. No middlemen. I could pay you, you could pay me directly. We're in control of our money. We have sovereignty of our money. Over time, all those enthusiasts that went into Bitcoin for that reason, because they started using it, because they were playing with it, caused store of value to arrive as an emergent property of Bitcoin. That's a very important thing to note. And that's something that I think a lot of maximalists get backwards. So what is my counter to Andreas' argument here? Well, one, what about cryptocurrencies that actually fulfill their promises? So yes, there are a ton of pump and dumps, but what about those rare cryptocurrencies that do everything they say they're going to do? And two, my second counter is that history has many examples of disruptive innovation. Just because people say it's not possible right now, it's not possible, whatever, doesn't mean it will never be possible. Things do come along that radically change the way we look at things. I think that's Nano. I'm going to dive into that towards the end, but that's why I think we need to be very careful about discounting everything as a pump and dump, especially when something works as it claims. Finally, my counter argument to this is, why was Bitcoin invented? It was meant, if you read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, it was meant to be peer-to-peer, decentralized digital cash, removing middlemen. Now close your eyes and imagine, what does the best technology look in that space? Don't talk realistically, just talk about what you think you would like to see. For me, it would be instant transactions, extremely simple, privacy, scalable, green, friendly to the environment, secure, all those things. So if you have that in mind as your ideal vision, what cryptocurrency gets you close? What cryptocurrency gets you closest? So Bitcoin was the first and it got us close. But do you really think that nothing can get closer? What if something really does have zero transaction fees? What if something really is nearly instant? What if something really is as decentralized or more decentralized than Bitcoin? Ask yourself those questions. Of course, Nano is not perfect. It has other issues. But on those main claims that I think are what made Bitcoin valuable in the early days, Nano does what it claims to do. Andreas' third argument is that incremental replacements, or improvements, I guess, are not enough. And I agree with this as well. Andreas gives an example of rabbits when they were brought to Australia, I think, and how the population boomed so quickly that they took over. Essentially, the network effect is what he's describing, where once the ecosystem is built, you have the developers, you have the adoption, it becomes very hard to overcome that. And that is true, that is correct. Incremental changes cannot take that over. But he also mentions that sufficiently differentiated cryptocurrencies might have a place. And he talks about this with his conversations with Vitalik on Ethereum versus Bitcoin, and why didn't he just build Ethereum on Bitcoin? And that's what comes to the last point what he made, was that design trade-offs change the equation. So Ethereum seems to be, of course, not 100% sure, it's still proving itself out, but seems to be different enough from Bitcoin that it will survive and have a place because of the smart contract functionality. But where Andreas disagrees with Ethereum maximalists is that Ethereum maximalists are now saying, oh, Ethereum can take over Bitcoin. But Andreas, and I actually agree, doesn't think that's the case because of the trade-offs Ethereum made to become a smart contract platform. Just off the top of my head, if you're doing smart contracts, you need to store more data. You need to process more data. That makes it automatically almost less efficient at a value transfer use case, which is what Bitcoin is trying to be, peer-to-peer digital cash. But now, what is my counter? What about alternatives that are not just slight improvements? What about cryptocurrencies like Nano that are orders of magnitude better in almost every single way? Zero fees instead of fees that go from 50 cents to $50 like we saw in January 2018, December 2017. Confirmation times that are in less than 1 second versus 10 minutes to 48 hours plus. huge. What about scalability? Nano has seen first layer mainnet production stress test of 300 plus proven blocks per second. That is many, many, many times more than Bitcoin has ever done and probably ever will do. Theoretically, on math and test, it's done far more than that, and really the biggest issue in proving that is actually generating enough transactions, because Nano has anti-spam mechanisms that make it hard to just throw out millions and billions of transactions. But I can dive into that a little bit later or in a different video. But keep in mind that in 2011, PayPal, with almost 100 million users, was doing a little bit more than 50 TPS. 50 TPS is about 4 million transactions per day, I want to say. And PayPal in 2011 was doing about 5 million with almost 100 million users. If Nano can do 300 right now in production, what does that mean for Bitcoin? That's just something to think about. Also, again, like on the previous slide, history has many examples of disruptive innovation, things that come along and completely destroy the previous technology because they're better in every way. You just go down the line of technologies like tape, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, that kind of thing, to now streaming technology, Netflix and all that kind of thing. Go to internet technology like dial-up to now we're at Google Fiber, terabit down, terabit up. Who still uses dial-up internet? To me, that's the way I view Bitcoin because of how fundamentally different and better Nano is. So Andreas mentioned that differentiated cryptocurrencies may have a place, but what about a cryptocurrency like Nano that has a radical focus on the same problem? Even more than Bitcoin, it is laser focused on peer-to-peer decentralized value transfer and being the most efficient way to solve that problem possible. It throws out all smart contracts. Right now, it's not doing privacy for that same reason, because it compromises that core vision. It is laser focused on that, and because it is making that trade-off, it is very hard for anything else to be better than that. I mean, how much better can you get than 1 second transaction times for full confirmation and 0 transaction fees and first layer scalability that scales with hardware? There's no artificial caps like block sizes or block times. It just does whatever hardware will allow it to do. And really, network bandwidth is Nano's main constraint. So think about that. The fourth argument that Andreas makes is that rich entities will control proof of stake. And what he says is that rich entities, state actors is a good example, could just buy control of proof of stake cryptocurrencies. And one, they'll want to make money off of you and just sell that stake immediately. Or two, they'll want to try to actually break the cryptocurrency, censor transactions, that kind of thing. So a couple of rebuttals to this. One, Nano isn't like traditional delegated proof of stake. It has some major design differences. Actually, let me pull up my notes on this one because I have a huge list. Because when people think of proof of stake, they think of things like EOS or other coins. But Nano has no fund lockups. Users can remotely redelegate their voting weight to anyone at any time, which is pretty huge. Actually, let me back up. So what's the counter to this? One is actually Andreas' own argument from before about cryptocurrencies like Nano being allowed to grow until it's too late. As I said before, Nano's kind of flying under the radar. People don't know, don't care. And when adoption really takes off will be when it's too late, when the market cap is really huge, when the adoption is really there, when the systems and software needed to better secure Nano, it's already very secure, but needed to address a lot of those potential concerns that people have, it will be too late by that point. Another question is, how much money is actually needed? The question I ask to you is, when would you sell your Bitcoin? And that's a question that's very important for this argument about control of proof of stake. There's some people like me who are idealists and will not sell our Nano until we can spend it directly for goods. When you have a solid base of people like me, and that's really what a lot of the Nano community is right now because it's gone way up and way back down, it's very difficult to find the supply to even buy to take control of the network. Another argument is that if an entity did have infinite resources, they could take over Bitcoin in the same way. They could buy mining hash rate. They could buy the hardware, the resources. In theory, on paper, when we're talking about infinite resources for the sake of argument here, Bitcoin could be taken over the same way or a very similar way. Also, Another good question to ask is, can this issue be mitigated in other ways? So what can actually be done if you have control of the stake of the network? Remember that in Nano, you can remotely redelegate your voting weight to anyone at any time without affecting your own funds. You just say, who do you want to be your representative? And that means that if any party is close to 50% voting weight or whatever, the community can move their voting weight to whoever they want. And that's what we've actually seen. Also, because the way Nano works and everyone has their own blockchain, there's not a single monolithic blockchain to put all transactions into. Only the owner of that blockchain, the person who has the private key, can add transactions to it. So even if you had control over the network, you couldn't arbitrarily create transactions on other people's accounts or anything because you have to have the private key. I also forgot to mention that Nano is significantly different from traditional delegated proof of stake. I mentioned that users can remotely redelegate their voting weight to anyone at any time, but there's also no fund lockups in Nano. There's no transaction fees, no staking, no mining, meaning that there's no emergent centralization from factors like economies of scale and profit maximization, which you get in Bitcoin or really any proof of stake currency as well, because you're making money, so you want to make more money. And usually when you have a lot of resources, it's easier to make more money, and that kind of over time leads to more centralization. Also in Nano, anyone can be a representative. Anyone can be a principal representative. You only need 0.1% of the voting weight to be delegated to you. Transactions can't be arbitrarily censored or reverted like they can in, I think, EOS or any of those coins that has like a constitution or a set number of representatives that controls transactions. You don't have that in Nano. So that mitigates some of the concerns. And also the supply is fixed. There's no mining, there's no inflation, which makes it quite different from a lot of other proof-of-stake cryptocurrencies. That's also why Nano rebranded that concept to Open Representative Voting, ORV, because it's just so different. Finally, Andreas argues that Bitcoin will only be replaced if it fails. And I kind of agree with this too, in a lot of ways. But I argue that Bitcoin has failed in a lot of ways. We saw transaction fees of $50 plus. We saw confirmation times of 48 hours plus. We've seen how dust has gotten trapped and the challenges of scaling the Lightning Network and making it user-friendly because of how Bitcoin works, really. And going back to Andreas's other point of fundamental design decisions and trade-offs limiting or contributing to how much a cryptocurrency can scale or solve a specific problem, that same issue is affecting Bitcoin itself. The fundamental design of Bitcoin, where all transactions have to go into a single monolithic ledger, makes it hugely problematic to scale. In other types of programming, we already move away from massive monoliths to more distributed, decentralized forms of processing of storage. We don't really see the mainframe style of computing anymore. I mean, in some specific aspects it has use, but now the big focus is distributing, decentralizing smaller, repeatable containers, lambdas, functions as a service, that kind of computing. And that's what Nano does. By getting rid of the monolithic blockchain and giving everyone their own blockchain, transactions are asynchronous. They're essentially directly between me and you, and other people can still transact regardless of what's happening between us, because they're not waiting for us to be done before they can add their transactions. They're not trying to stuff it into a block, a shared block. And then also my other counterpoint is that some people will almost always gravitate towards better alternatives. Nano exists and it functions as is. As is, it has zero fees and less than 1 second transaction times. That makes it really good in certain use cases, and people are moving in that direction. We've started to see companies of their own free will to adopt Nano and study Nano and implement Nano because it provides major cost savings, huge business benefits in other ways. They're in control of their own money, instant full settlement across the world. It solves a really big problem, and Bitcoin currently does not compete, and I don't think it ever will really, because of, again, fundamental design decisions, its current architecture. So in conclusion, actually before conclusion, let me talk a little bit more about how Nano does what it says it does. I'll probably create a separate video that just dives all the way into Nano and talks about it in a lot more detail. But the reason Nano can do what it says it can do is because it uses a fundamentally different architecture. Like I said, instead of a single massive blockchain you have to put all transactions into, I have a blockchain, you have a blockchain. You and I are the only ones that can update that blockchain. So I make a transaction by saying, okay, remove this from my blockchain, add it to yours. And then you on your end, since you're the only one that can modify your blockchain, say, okay, I accept this transaction, I add it to my blockchain, and now you can spend it. How do you prevent double spends? How do you prevent network attacks? That's where Nano's open representative voting system, ORV, comes into play. When I make that transaction, it's broadcasted out to the network. I could be my own representative if I'm online and I want to vote for my own transactions, or I can delegate my voting weight. I can still spend my Nano, but I'm delegating my voting weight to a representative to vote on my behalf. For example, you could say Coinbase. I trust them to vote on my behalf. What is voting actually? It's just rebroadcasting the first valid transaction that they see. The reason you do it based on voting weight instead of straight just individual nodes is because you want to counteract Sybil attacks, where an attacker could spin up a bunch of nodes and then they essentially control the network because they're the majority of the nodes, and then they could try to censor transactions or whatever. So that's Nano's core architecture, and that's really huge because me being able to transact directly with you, like I said before, that's asynchronous. We do our own thing. We don't care about trying to make it to a shared block. You don't have contention to worry about. The other key feature of Nano is the lack of transaction fees. And it does this because it uses a small amount of client-side proof of work to make transactions instead of a fee. So if I want to send you money, I do a little proof of work on my machine. I prove that I've used some resources, which takes time, and boom, my transaction goes through. The other way it's able to do this is because the network is so efficient, so scalable, it becomes very hard to spam the network. Even if you were able to generate the proof of work for millions of transactions, because Nano processes them so quickly, you're not going to be able to congest the network for very long. And even if you were to congest the network, I could do just a little bit more proof of work to get my transaction prioritized above yours. So that's just a little bit about Nano. There's tons to talk about, so feel free to ask me. Honestly, I'll probably point you to docs.nano.org, which is essentially the living white paper. But yeah, I'll do my best to try and answer any questions. But in conclusion, some things I'd also like to mention is that first mover advantage doesn't always last. Andreas actually mentions this himself in the video by bringing up Google as an example, saying that it was the 21st search engine. It wasn't the first, it was the 21st. Why did it take over? It wasn't just incrementally better, it was better in almost every way, simpler, faster, more accurate. Think about that when you make your decision about cryptocurrency. 2, something I strongly agree with Andreas on is that utility is what matters. Sure, once something is valuable, like Bitcoin now, it's valuable, that also brings additional value because you might be able to see it as a store of value. But why did Bitcoin become valuable in the first place? Just like Andreas said, it was the early adopters, the enthusiasts that saw that Bitcoin solved a specific problem. It had utility, and they started using it. They started experimenting. They started playing with it. They started building. And that brought more people. And that brought more people. And then store of value emerged. It was an emergent property of Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin loses its utility or has reduced utility because it can't scale for the real world, because it has crazy fees, where will people go? Think about that. Finally, a big point in Andreas' video is people always ask him, what should you invest in? And he doesn't tell them straight up, invest in Bitcoin, invest in Ethereum, invest in Nano. And I'm not going to say that either. What he says is what I agree with. Understand the technology. Understand the problem. What is this technology trying to solve? And then learn about it. Are there better technologies, or are there technologies that solve the problem better? What are the trade-offs they're making? Invest in the knowledge and then make your own decision. Yeah, there we go. I'll leave it there. That was a pretty long video. I'm going to edit a lot out. Please feel free to leave comments below and I will try to answer any questions. But yeah, so as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. Peace.